Judge laughs at black disabled veteran in court. 5 minutes later, he's the one in handcuffs. The Jefferson County Courthouse buzzed with unusual activity for a Thursday morning. In courtroom 4, rows of veterans filled the gallery, their military caps and unit pins identifying their service. They had come to support the Veterans Memorial Foundation in its final hearing against the city of Riverton, which had reversed its approval for a memorial honoring soldiers lost in post-9/11 conflicts. In the front row sat Darius Cole, the foundation's founder, his prosthetic leg extended slightly into the aisle for comfort. At 35, the former Marine carried himself with quiet dignity. His dark skin contrasted with his crisp white shirt and maroon tie bearing the emblem of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Today marked exactly 10 years since the IED explosion in Afghanistan that had taken his right leg and the lives of 3 brothers-in-arms, James Rivera, Kyle Thompson, and Anthony Davis. "You okay?" whispered Marcus Washington, who had served in Darius's unit and now sat beside him. "I'm good," Darius replied, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "Just want to get this done for them." Judge Gregory Shaw entered, and the bailiff called for all to rise. At 62, Shaw had presided over the county court for nearly 2 decades. Known for his conservative rulings and no-nonsense approach, he commanded a courtroom with unquestioned authority. The hearing began with the city arguing that a developer's concerns about property values justified reversing the memorial approval. The foundation's attorney countered that the reversal came only after pressure from wealthy developers with connections to council members. When called to testify, Darius made his way to the witness stand, his prosthetic creating a slight unevenness in his gait. As he settled into the chair, he caught Judge Shaw glancing at his prosthetic leg, something unreadable crossing the older man's face. "Mr. Cole, could you tell the court why establishing this memorial is important to you personally?" asked Sarah Chen, the foundation's attorney. Darius took a deep breath. 10 years ago today, I was serving as a Marine in Helmand Province. My unit hit an IED. I lost my right leg." He gestured briefly to his prosthetic. 3 of my brothers lost their lives: James Rivera, Kyle Thompson, and Anthony Davis. James and Kyle were from Riverton. We had gone to high school together. As he spoke their names, Darius's voice caught slightly a momentary break in his otherwise steady delivery. From the bench, Judge Shaw made a sound something between a scoff and a sigh, audible enough to carry to the witness stand. "Mr. Cole," he interrupted, "while I appreciate your service, we need to focus on the legal matters at hand, not emotional appeals." A ripple of murmurs ran through the veterans in attendance. Sarah Chen raised an eyebrow, but continued professionally, "Your Honor, Mr. Cole's personal experience is directly relevant to the foundation's standing." "May I proceed?" Judge Shaw waved impatiently. "Continue, but stick to facts pertinent to the land dispute." As Darius continued testifying about the memorial plans, Judge Shaw's attention wandered. He checked his watch twice, and during a detailed explanation of community outreach efforts, he leaned over to his clerk and whispered something that made the young man smile uncomfortably. When the city attorney rose for cross-examination, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Harold Bennett was known for his aggressive questioning style. "Mr. Cole," Bennett began, "isn't it true that your foundation has used emotionally charged language in its fundraising, specifically invoking fallen soldiers to generate sympathy and donations?" Before Darius could answer, Sarah Chen objected. "Objection, Your Honor, counsel is impugning the integrity of the witness without basis. Overruled. Judge Shaw replied quickly, "The witness will answer." Darius met Bennett's gaze steadily. "Our foundation honors the memory and sacrifice of those who died serving this country. If speaking truthfully about their service and deaths is emotionally charged, then yes, we've done that. But we've never misrepresented our purpose." Bennett held up a fundraising flyer. "This material describes the proposed memorial as sacred ground. Isn't that an attempt to give your project religious significance to make it harder for the city to oppose?" "No, sir," Darius replied calmly. "To those of us who served and to the families of those who didn't come home, the ground where we remember our fallen is sacred, not in a religious sense, but in terms of its profound meaning." At this, Judge Shaw made another audible scoff, this time accompanied by an eye roll visible to much of the courtroom. "Mr. Cole," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "this is a civil matter about land use, not a Medal of Honor ceremony. Your military service, while commendable, doesn't grant special privileges in city planning decisions." A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. Marcus half rose from his seat, stopped only by the restraining hand of the veteran beside him. Darius remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged, save for a slight tightening around his eyes. "I understand that, Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm simply answering the questions as asked." "Well, answer them without the dramatic pauses and catch in your voice." Judge Shaw continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension. "This theatrical display might work for your fundraising events, but it has no place in my courtroom." Before anyone could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from the back. A veteran in a wheelchair had stood up, supported by arm crutches, his face contorted with anger. "How dare you!" he shouted at the judge. "You have no right to speak to him that way. Do you have any idea what men like Darius have sacrificed?" The bailiff moved quickly toward the disruption. Judge Shaw's face darkened as he banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order!" He pointed at the man who had shouted, "Bailiff, remove that individual and charge him with contempt." As the bailiff reached the veteran, Darius spoke up, his voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. "Your Honor, please, Staff Sergeant Wilson meant no disrespect. Today is a difficult day for many of us." Judge Shaw turned his glare on Darius. "Are you presuming to tell me how to run my courtroom?" "Mr. Cole." "No, Your Honor. I'm asking for understanding." Something in Darius's dignified composure, the absolute absence of anger, in the face of the judge's hostility, seemed to further irritate Shaw. "Understanding?" he repeated, a mocking edge in his voice. "Perhaps you misunderstand the purpose of this court. We're not here to provide group therapy for veterans unable to move past their experiences. We're here to interpret and apply the law." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Bennett, the city's attorney, looked shocked. Sarah Chen was already on her feet, her objection forming, when something unexpected happened. From her position near the media area, a court reporter named Aisha Johnson stood up, her face a mask of professional neutrality, despite the tears visible in her eyes. With deliberate movements, she removed her official court credentials and placed them on her desk. Then, making eye contact with Judge Shaw, she walked out of the courtroom. It was a small act of protest, silent and dignified, but its impact was immediate. A moment later, another court employee, a clerk in the back of the room, did the same, then a spectator. Then another judge, Shaw's face flushed with anger. Anyone who leaves this courtroom is in contempt, he threatened, but his words had lost their power. More people stood not shouting or causing disruption, but simply walking out in silent solidarity with Darius Cole throughout it all. Darius remained seated in the witness box, his posture straight, his expression revealing nothing of what must have been churning inside him. When his eyes met Marcus's in the gallery, he gave a small shake of his head, a silent request for his friend to stay to not join the protest. Judge Shaw, now visibly flustered, turned to his bailiff. "Restore order immediately. I want names of everyone who walked out. They'll all be cited for contempt." The bailiff, a veteran himself, judging by the pin on his uniform, hesitated visibly before moving to follow the order. In that moment of chaos, no one immediately noticed the woman who had slipped in through a side door. District Attorney Eleanor Mitchell, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the county, she observed the scene for several seconds before approaching the bench and asking to speak with the judge privately. After a hurried conference in chambers that lasted less than 5 minutes, Judge Shaw returned to the courtroom, his face ashen. Without making eye contact with anyone, he announced in a strained voice, "This court is in recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. At that time, Judge Rebecca Williams will take over these proceedings. You are all dismissed." With that, he stood and quickly exited, leaving behind a courtroom buzzing with shocked whispers and confusions. The video that exploded across the internet that evening presented a stark visual narrative, a decorated Black Marine veteran with a prosthetic leg testifying with dignity about fallen comrades being openly mocked by a white judge who then threatened those who silently protested his behavior. By 6 p.m., the courthouse steps had become the site of an impromptu gathering. Veterans from across the county arrived in a steady stream, many in uniform. They were joined by community members, students from the local university, and growing media presence. The atmosphere was solemn rather than angry, a vigil more than a protest. Darius had not planned to return to the courthouse that evening. After the hearing, he had gone to the cemetery where Kyle Thompson was buried, seeking the quiet communion he often found there, but a series of increasingly urgent text messages from Marcus had drawn him back. As his truck approached the courthouse, Darius was stunned by the scene. Hundreds of people lined the steps and spilled onto the lawn, many holding candles that glowed in the gathering dusk. A path seemed to open naturally as he made his way through the crowd, people stepping aside respectfully. At the top of the steps stood Marcus and Sarah Chen, engaged in conversation with District Attorney Mitchell. When they spotted Darius, relief washed over their faces. "What's happening?" Darius asked, genuinely confused by the gathering scale. "You haven't seen the videos?" Marcus asked incredulously. Darius shook his head. "I turned my phone off at the cemetery." Eleanor Mitchell stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, I'm District Attorney Mitchell. I think we should talk privately before any statements are made." Inside the now empty courthouse in a small conference room, Mitchell explained the situation with the direct approach of a career prosecutor. "Multiple videos of today's hearing have gone viral," she began. "They show Judge Shaw's behavior quite clearly. The governor's office has already called, as has the State Judicial Conduct Board. This has escalated beyond a local incident." Darius absorbed this quietly. "What exactly happened after you spoke with Judge Shaw?" "There are rumors he was removed from the case." Mitchell's professional demeanor cracked slightly, showing a flash of anger. "I informed Judge Shaw that his conduct violated multiple canons of judicial ethics, and that I was initiating formal proceedings for his removal from the bench. I also advised him that continuing to preside over your case would create grounds for immediate appeal of any ruling he made. So he recused himself? Darius concluded, not voluntarily. Mitchell clarified, the chief judge of the district court ordered him removed after reviewing preliminary footage. Judge Williams will take over tomorrow, as announced, and the contempt charges against those who walked out dropped. Mitchell assured him there will be no repercussions for what was clearly a peaceful, dignified protest against judicial misconduct. Sarah Chin, who had joined them, leaned forward. Darius, there's something else you should know. The Foundation's website has received over $100,000 in donations since the videos went public. People are responding to what happened today. Darius closed his eyes briefly, conflicting emotions playing across his face. That's not why I testified. This was never supposed to be about me. It's not about you, Marcus countered gently. It's about what you represent. Today, people saw a system disrespect someone who sacrificed for this country. They saw the same dismissive attitude that too many veterans, especially black veterans, face every day. And they saw you respond with dignity instead of anger. District Attorney Mitchell nodded in agreement. Mr. Cole, sometimes an individual case becomes a catalyst for addressing larger issues. How you choose to respond matters not just for your memorial, but potentially for veterans across the country. Before Darius could reply, a knock at the door interrupted them. A young aide entered with a tablet. Ma'am, Judge Shaw just released a statement. Mitchell took the tablet and scanned the text quickly, her expression darkening. She handed the device to Darius. The statement was brief but inflammatory. While I regret if my words were misinterpreted, maintaining order and decorum in the courtroom is essential to the judicial process. Emotional displays and coordinated walkouts undermine our legal system. The outsized reaction to today's routine hearing suggests an organized attempt to pressure the court through social media manipulation and manufactured outrage. He's making it worse, Sarah whispered, reading over Darius's shoulder. He's scared, Mitchell corrected. He's trying to reframe the narrative before the Judicial Conduct Board meets. It won't work. The videos are too clear. Darius handed the tablet back, his decision made. I need to make a statement of my own, not to attack Judge Shaw, but to refocus attention on what actually matters. Which is? Mitchell asked, studying him closely. Remembering the fallen? Darius replied simply, that's all this has ever been about. Outside, the crowd had continued to grow, now numbering well over 1,000 people. As Darius emerged from the courthouse, a hush fell. Someone had set up a small podium and microphone at the top of the steps. Darius approached slowly, conscious of the cameras tracking his movement, and the sea of faces turned toward him expectantly. Thank you all for being here. He began, his deep voice carrying clearly, I never expected anything like this when I went to court this morning. I was just there to speak for those who can't speak for themselves anymore. He paused, making eye contact with fellow veterans whose expressions reflected the same mixture of pain and purpose he carried. What happened in that courtroom has clearly touched a nerve, but I don't want this to become about one judge's words or actions. This isn't about Judge Shaw. It's about James Rivera, Kyle Thompson, Anthony Davis, and 11 other sons and daughters of Riverton who gave everything for their country. Darius reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. I've carried this list with me every day for 10 years. Their names, their ages, when they died, their units. Not because I need help remembering them. I see their faces every time I close my eyes. I carry it to remind myself that their story deserves to be told, that their sacrifice deserves to be honored. He unfolded the paper, the simple act drawing every eye. James Rivera, Marine Corps, age 19. Kyle Thompson, Marine Corps, age 21. Anthony Davis, Marine Corps, age 20. Rebecca Martinez, Army, age 22. As Darius read each name, followed by a moment of silence, the power of the simple recitation brought tears to many eyes. There was no political statement, no call for action against Judge Shaw, just the solemn remembrance of 14 young lives cut short in service. When he finished reading the names, Darius looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He made no attempt to hide. This is why we need the memorial. Not for me, not for those of us who came home, but for them, for their families, for this community, so that 50 years from now someone might pause, read their names, and remember that freedom isn't free. That's all we've ever wanted. As he stepped away from the microphone, the crowd erupted in applause, not the raucous cheering of a political rally, but the deep, respectful appreciation for truth spoken plainly. In that moment, the narrative shifted decisively away from outrage at judicial misconduct toward the higher purpose Darius had articulated. Unknown to anyone present among those watching the live stream was Judge Gregory Shaw himself, alone in his home office, a glass of bourbon untouched before him, as he watched the man he had mocked demonstrate a moral authority he himself had never achieved despite decades on the bench. Also watching from his office in the state capitol was Governor Michael Lawson, who turned to his chief of staff and said simply, "Find out what we can do to make sure that memorial gets built." Now, the following morning, the scene at the courthouse was dramatically different. Security presence had tripled with lines to enter. Stretching around the block, Judge Rebecca Williams had moved the proceedings to the largest courtroom available, but it still couldn't accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. As Darius arrived with Marcus and Sarah Chen, a court official escorted them to a private conference room where representatives from the city waited. Mayor Robert Jenkins rose as they entered. "Mr. Cole, in light of recent developments, the city would like to propose a settlement." Over the next 30 minutes, the mayor outlined a proposal that exceeded what the Veterans Memorial Foundation had originally requested. The city would not only reapprove the memorial at Lakeside Park, but would increase the allocated space, contribute $250,000 in municipal funds toward construction, and establish an annual maintenance endowment. In addition, Mayor Jenkins continued, visibly uncomfortable, "The City Council wishes to issue a formal apology for the delays and obstacles placed in the path of this project. We recognize that our handling of this matter has caused pain to veterans and their families." When he finished speaking, Darius turned to Sarah. Thoughts. The attorney's expression was professionally neutral, but satisfaction gleamed in her eyes. "The terms are extremely favorable, more than we expected to achieve. Even with a ruling, I would recommend acceptance." Darius nodded slowly, then addressed the mayor directly. "The foundation accepts your proposal with one additional request. I want written confirmation that the developer who originally objected has withdrawn all opposition. I don't want to risk future challenges after construction begins." Mayor Jenkins cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, Riverton Development Partners contacted my office first thing this morning. They're offering to donate an additional parcel of land adjacent to the park to expand the memorial site, and they've committed $100,000 to the project." Marcus couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. Amazing how quickly priorities change when the cameras are rolling. "It doesn't matter why they changed their minds," Darius said quietly. "What matters is that the memorial will be built. That's all I've cared about from the beginning." 3 months later, on a bitterly cold January morning, Darius stood at the construction site that would soon become the Riverton Veterans Memorial. Despite the freezing temperature, he felt a warmth spreading through him as he watched workers positioning the first of the stone panels that would bear the names of the fallen. The project was proceeding ahead of schedule, fueled by donations that had far exceeded the foundation's original goals and by the enthusiastic support of local construction companies, many of which had offered services at reduced rates or pro bono. If progress continued at the current pace, the memorial would be completed by spring, allowing for a dedication ceremony on Memorial Day. Marcus joined him at the site, stamping his feet against the cold as they observed the careful positioning of the stone panel. "They're doing good work," he commented, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Darius nodded satisfaction, evident in his expression. "Better than I imagined when we started planning this 3 years ago." "A lot has changed in 3 months," Marcus observed. "The national attention, the funding. It's a different world from when we were scraping together donations at VFW fish fries." Indeed, Darius's life had transformed dramatically since the courthouse incident. After accepting the governor's appointment to the Veterans Justice Reform Commission, he had become a sought-after speaker at events across the country. The foundation had expanded its mission beyond the single memorial, now working to establish similar tributes in other communities. Yet, with the increased visibility had come challenges neither Darius nor Marcus had anticipated. Conservative media outlets had begun questioning Darius's political agenda, suggesting the commission appointment was part of a leftist plan to undermine the judicial system. Meanwhile, some progressive activists expressed frustration that Darius refused to explicitly frame his experience in terms of racial justice, accusing him of downplaying racism in the courtroom incident. The pressure to align with one political narrative or another had been intense, but Darius had maintained his focus on the memorial and on practical reforms that would benefit veterans regardless of political affiliations. This steadfast refusal to be co-opted by either side had only increased his moral authority among veterans themselves. As Darius and Marcus were preparing to leave the construction site, a black SUV pulled up, and District Attorney Eleanor Mitchell emerged. "Mr. Cole," she called, approaching with quick steps despite the icy ground. "I thought you'd want to hear this directly from me. The Judicial Conduct Board has reached its decision regarding Judge Shaw." Darius tensed slightly. The investigation had dragged on longer than anyone expected, with Shaw fighting vigorously against potential removal from the bench. "What's the verdict? 6-month suspension without pay, mandatory sensitivity training, and probationary status for 2 years upon return to the bench," Mitchell reported. They stopped short of removal, citing his long service record and the fact that this was his first formal complaint. Darius absorbed this information silently, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts on whether the punishment was adequate. "There's more," Mitchell continued. "As part of the settlement, Judge Shaw has agreed to make a public apology at the memorial dedication ceremony. If the foundation approves, he's also committed to performing 200 hours of community service with veterans organizations." "That's his choice," Darius replied evenly. "But I'm not interested in public spectacles of contrition. The dedication should honor the fallen, not rehash courthouse drama." Mitchell studied him carefully. "You know, most people in your position would want to see him suffer more consequences. Public humiliation, career destruction, revenge for what he did. I didn't go to that courtroom seeking justice for myself," Darius said quietly. "I went seeking justice for James Kyle Anthony and the others. That hasn't changed." As Mitchell departed, Marcus gave voice to what many were thinking. "You're being too easy on him. What he did came from somewhere deep. That kind of contempt doesn't form overnight." "Probably not," Darius acknowledged, "but destroying his career doesn't advance what I care about. It just creates another angry, bitter man in the world." He turned back to watch the workers positioning the stone panel, his focus returning to the memorial that had always been his primary concern. The months leading up to the memorial dedication were filled with both progress and tension. The Veterans Justice Reform Commission had become increasingly divided along political lines, with Senator James Harrison and his allies pushing for recommendations that explicitly addressed racial disparities in the justice system, while other commissioners advocated for a more neutral approach focused on veterans as a whole. 3 days before the scheduled dedication ceremony, Darius visited the nearly completed memorial alone in the quiet evening hours after the construction crews had departed. As he traced his fingers over Kyle Thompson's name engraved in the cool stone, a sense of fulfillment washed over him. Whatever else had happened, the political complications, the media attention, the ongoing debates about justice and recognition, this tangible tribute to his fallen brothers and sisters represented the fulfillment of the promise he had made. The sound of footsteps interrupted his reverie. Turning, he was surprised to see Eleanor Mitchell approaching, a folder tucked under her arm and concern evident in her expression. "Mr. Cole, I apologize for interrupting your private moment," she began, "but there's a situation developing that you need to be aware of." She handed him the folder, which contained printed copies of emails between Senator Harrison and several progressive advocacy groups. The correspondence outlined a plan to use the memorial dedication ceremony as a platform for a major announcement about racial disparities in the justice system, complete with statistics specifically highlighting Judge Shaw's record of harsher sentences for defendants of color. These were leaked to my office by a staffer concerned about the potential hijacking of the event. Mitchell explained Harrison plans to unveil this report during his speaking slot at the dedication, framing it as an extension of the issues raised by your courtroom experience. Darius read through the emails carefully, his expression growing increasingly troubled. This ceremony is supposed to be about honoring the fallen, not advancing a political agenda, however worthy that agenda might be. In another context, exactly, Mitchell agreed, but Harrison believes connecting these issues will give both more impact. He's already arranged for national media coverage. The meeting with Senator Harrison took place the following morning in the politician's district office. Harrison made no attempt to deny the leaked plan, instead defending it with passionate conviction. This is a perfect opportunity to leverage the attention your story has generated. Harrison argued, the memorial dedication will draw media from across the country. We can use that platform to highlight systemic injustice and push for broader reforms. The dedication ceremony is about honoring 14 young people who gave their lives in service. Darius countered, his voice steady but firm. Their families will be present. This day should be about them, not about political messaging, however important. Harrison leaned forward, frustration evident. With respect, Mr. Cole, you're missing the bigger picture. The individual injustice you experienced connects to broader patterns that affect thousands of veterans, particularly veterans of color. I understand the importance of that work, Darius acknowledged, but there are appropriate venues for that discussion, and the memorial dedication isn't one of them. By evening, news of the program change had leaked to local media, generating speculation about political tensions behind the scenes. Several outlets reached out to Darius for comment, but he declined all interviews, focusing instead on final preparations for the ceremony and personal calls to family members of the fallen Memorial Day dawned clear and warm. By mid-morning, the area surrounding the new memorial was filled with hundreds of people, veterans in uniform or wearing service insignia, families with children waving small American flags, community members who had supported the project, and a significant media presence positioned discreetly at the perimeter. At precisely 10:00 a.m., Darius stepped to the podium positioned before the memorial wall, surveying the gathered crowd with a mixture of gratitude and solemnity. Despite Harrison's threats, both the governor and the senator were present, seated in the front row alongside other dignitaries. Welcome to the dedication of the Riverton Veterans Memorial. Darius began, his deep voice carrying clearly, today, we fulfill a promise made to 14 brave men and women who gave everything for their country. We promised they would not be forgotten. This memorial ensures that promise will be kept for generations to come. He gestured to the stone wall behind him, where the morning sun illuminated the engraved names. Each name represents not just a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine who died in service, but a child who will never return, to parents who wait, a parent who left children behind, a future that will never be realized. Our community is poorer for their loss, but richer for their service and sacrifice. Today, we will hear not from officials or dignitaries, he continued, but from those who knew these 14 heroes best, their families and their brothers and sisters in arms. Their stories, not political speeches, will consecrate this ground. What followed was unlike typical dedication ceremonies, with their formal processions and carefully scripted remarks. Instead, mothers and fathers, siblings and children, battle buddies, and childhood friends approached the podium one by one to share memories of the fallen. Each account revealed dimensions of the 14 lives that official records and news reports had never captured. Near the conclusion of the ceremony, a final speaker approached the podium, Gregory Shaw, the judge whose courtroom behavior had inadvertently catalyzed so much of what followed. His presence had not been announced in the program, and a murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as he took his position. Shaw looked markedly different from the imperious judicial figure who had mocked Darius months earlier. His face was thinner, his posture less commanding, his expression humbled by experience. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the condescension that had characterized his courtroom manner. I'm here today not as a judge, but as a citizen who failed to show proper respect to a man who had sacrificed greatly for his country. Shaw began his gaze moving from the crowd to Darius. My behavior in that courtroom was inexcusable, a reflection of biases I had never properly examined. Over the past months, as part of my community service at the VA hospital, I've had the privilege of working with veterans who generously shared their experiences despite having every reason to dismiss me. Through them, I've begun to understand something about true dignity, the kind that doesn't depend on robes or titles or power, but on character and purpose. Shaw turned fully toward Darius, now addressing him directly. Mr. Cole, the grace with which you responded to my disrespect has taught me more than any judicial training program ever could. You had every right to demand my professional destruction, yet you consistently turned attention away from yourself and toward those this memorial honors. That example of putting purpose above ego, service above self-interest, will guide the remainder of my judicial career. As Shaw returned to his seat, Darius moved to the podium for the ceremony's conclusions. In closing, he said, I ask that we observe a moment of silence, not just for the 14 names inscribed on this wall, but for all who have given their lives in service to this nation. Remember that behind every name is a story, a family, a future that might have been. Our duty is to ensure those sacrifices are never forgotten. The silence that followed was complete. No whispers, no shuffling of feet, not even the click of camera shutters. For that suspended moment, the gathered crowd was united in remembrance, transcending the divisions of politics, race, and class that so often defined their interactions. When Darius finally spoke again, his words were brief but powerful. This memorial now belongs to all of us, to our community and our country. May it stand as a reminder not only of those we have lost, but of our ongoing responsibility to build a nation worthy of their sacrifice. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Darius found himself alone before the memorial wall, tracing his fingers over the names as he had done so many times during construction. The journey from that contentious courtroom to this moment of fulfillment had been neither straightforward nor simple. Yet, standing before the completed memorial, a permanent tribute to fallen comrades that would endure long after the controversies surrounding its creation had faded, Darius felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for the decade since the explosion that had taken his leg and his brother's lives. In that quiet moment of completion, the words he had spoken to Kyle Thompson's grave a decade earlier returned to him with the weight of a vow fulfilled. I'll make sure they remember you, brother, not how you died, but how you lived. That's a promise. It was a promise kept not through anger or outrage at injustice, but through the steady persistence of memory and honor, a legacy far more enduring than any courtroom confrontation could ever be.